Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're getting into a really fascinating stack of sources.
Yeah, and they center on a belief that feels, well, feels almost universal.
It really does. This idea that a child is, a gift of the expression of love. It sounds beautiful, unifying,
But the sources, they don't start there. They immediately give us a reality check.
a huge one. They point out that for every person who sees a child as a welcome gift, there's someone else who sees that child as an unwanted result of the very same act.
Mm.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. The core argument here is that this massive conflict we see, the pro-life, pro-choice crisis, all these other really deep social issues around children, it all stems from a misunderstanding.
A foundational one, a misunderstanding from everyone involved about what that phrase, a child as a gift, actually means.
Exactly. So our mission today is to explore a specific spiritual framework from these sources that, well, it seeks to completely redefine what that gift is.
And to do that, we have to start with the conventional view. The sources are pretty blunt about it.
They are. They say that when we use the phrase expression of love, it's usually just a polite euphemism.
A euphemism for the natural biological urge for sexual intercourse.
Right. And they stress that the intent behind the act is, well, it's seldom primarily about producing a child. It's about gratification or connection.
And that's the whole hinge point. If the intent wasn't procreation, then an unwanted pregnancy logically doesn't feel like a gift.
No, it feels like a burden, a disruption, an accident.
Which makes total sense in a material world.
It does. But here's where it gets really interesting. The sources claim that even when a child is intended, the gift is still misunderstood.
Because it's all connected to a deeper spiritual mechanism that governs, well, everything, not just having kids.
Yes, so before we can even define the gift, we have to talk about destiny. We have to talk about how our lives are actually structured.
Exactly. The sources lay out 3 governing spiritual principles that are all interconnected.
Let's start with the first one. It really seems to put all the power, all the responsibility back on the individual.
It does. The first principle is that everything that happens to us, every single circumstance, good or bad, is the result of our own action.
And action isn't just, doing something physical.
No, it's our words, our deeds, and even our thoughts. Fundamentally, these are all just expressions of our freedom to choose.
So we're not just passively floating through life with things happening to us.
Not at all. We are constantly, actively creating our own reality through choice. Which leads right into the second principle.
Which is about how those choices come to be.
Right. Choices are always made from a menu of options, but those options only appear in response to a request we make.
And the request comes from desire.
The request always stems from an underlying desire.
Okay, so let's make that real. I desire a new career path. That desire makes me request options, maybe by searching online. The universe then offers me options like job postings, and then I choose.
That's a perfect analogy. It's the constant seamless flow. And that brings us to the third principle.
The result.
The exercise of choice always, without fail, has a corresponding result. And that result is always tied back to the original desire that started the whole cycle.
That sounds almost like it could be chaos if every single thought is setting off this chain reaction.
You'd think, Sue, but it's actually the opposite of chaos. The sources call this mechanism the definition of cosmic justice. It's set up to prove to us that we are the masters of our own fate. Nothing is arbitrary.
It's all just a feedback loop.
A perfectly calibrated feedback loop. But the sources are very clear that this whole mechanism, this entire cycle, it only has one purpose.
And this is really the core of the whole philosophy, isn't it?
It is. The sole purpose is to aid the development of our spiritual essence. That core part of us that is, the real human being.
So development means what exactly?
Well,
refining ourselves.
Exactly. Learning to make better choices by consciously experiencing the effects of our previous ones. We learn to avoid desires that lead to pain and cultivate ones that lead to growth.
Okay, I think we need to pause on the word love here because it's used in a very specific way. If I make a bad choice and suffer, how is that an act of love?
That's the key question. In this framework, love isn't a feeling. Love is defined as anything that serves as aid for our development.
So the painful result is the act of love.
Precisely. Because it's the lesson. It's the feedback you need to self-correct. It's an active, demanding love, not a passive one.
So growth only happens when we're aware of this, when we consciously look at the results of our choices and extract the lesson.
Yes. If you just blame other people or bad luck, you miss the lesson entirely. And the cycle just repeats itself, often more intensely.
Okay, that is a solid foundation. So let's bring that mechanism back to the child. If all our choices create experiences for spiritual growth, what specifically is the learning experience a child brings to a parent?
And this is the big aha moment in the source material. It turns the whole thing on its head. The conventional idea is that the child is the gift. This spiritual framework says no. The true gift the child offers the parent is the opportunity to develop and practice the expression of love.
Wow. Okay. That completely flips the script. So the expression of love is not the sexual act.
Absolutely not. The expression of love, the true spiritual expression, is the high degree of selflessness that parenting demands.
The child then, whether you intended for them to be there or not, just creates this long-term mandatory opportunity to practice selfless love.
For another being, yes. And it's crucial to note this opportunity is the same whether the child is yours by birth, adoption, or any other form of caregiving. The biological link is irrelevant to the spiritual task.
So the child is like a personalized spiritual curriculum, designed to force the caregiver out of their own self-interest.
That's a great way to put it. And the sources list the core responsibilities in that curriculum. They call them ample opportunities for spiritual learning.
Let's walk through those 5 areas because they're very specific. The first is the most basic. Provide basic needs and safety. Food, shelter, a safe home.
The foundation. Then the second one goes deeper. Offer emotional support and love. This means being nurturing, helping the child handle their emotions, building their self-confidence.
Based on who they actually are, not who the parent wants them to be.
Exactly, not parental projection. And then the third one is where the real self-work for the parent kicks in.
Guide moral and behavioral development, teaching values, discipline, and being a role model.
And that's the tough one, because it demands a consistency from the parent that they might not naturally have. It forces them to look at their own moral inconsistencies.
Right. You can't teach a child honesty if you're constantly lying yourself. The child becomes a mirror.
A perfect mirror. And it forces the parent to live up to the standard they're trying to set. The child's need for guidance forces the parent's own ennoblement.
That makes so much sense. Okay, pillar 4 is ensure education and learning. So school, curiosity, but also ethical and spiritual education and life skills.
And the fifth one takes the long view. Be a role model and advocate. Basically modeling how to be a good person in the world and helping them become a positive contributor to society.
So if we look at those 5 pillars, the spiritual benefit for the adult seems to be the main point. To do any of those things well, the caregiver has to develop those qualities in themselves first.
It's a system of reciprocal growth. It has to be. And this, the sources say, is proof of 2 very old spiritual laws. The first is, only in giving does one receive.
In trying to ennoble the child, the caregiver ennobles themselves.
And the second one is, what you sow is what you reap.
Which you pointed out with the honesty example. The parent reaps the consequence of their own hypocrisy through the child's character.
And this brings us to what the sources see as a major societal problem.
The consequences of ignoring this.
Yes. When caregivers focus only on the material side of things, the best schools, the nicest clothes, without doing the inner work of their own self-ennoblement, they are completely missing the real gift.
And that void, that lack of spiritual depth, it just gets passed down to the child.
It's inescapable. And you see the result in the quality of the adult that is raised. The sources argue pretty forcefully that this widespread ignorance is a root cause of today's declining moral and ethical standards.
It also seems to draw a straight line to the rise in emotional problems we see everywhere. Anxiety, instability. It seems reasonable to connect that to a failure to raise emotionally secure, spiritually grounded children.
The emotional health of a child is a direct reflection of the selflessness of the parent. The mechanism is unforgiving. If a parent chooses to neglect their own inner work, the child feels it, and eventually society feels it.
This framework gives us a really powerful, almost objective lens to look at really complex modern choices, like adoption and surrogacy.
It does. It forces us to ask one critical question about our motivation. Is it driven by a desire to receive something or a desire to give something?
The sources are careful to be sympathetic to the pain of infertility. But they do question the thinking when people get overwhelmed with this desire for a child of their own.
And specifically, a child with their own DNA.
Right. Why does that matter so much?
If the true spiritual goal is to selflessly raise another human spirit, to engage with that curriculum, why does the body that spirit inhabits have to share your genetic code?
The suggestion is that this intense focus on DNA is really a promotion of self. It's more about a material desire to continue your own line, not a spiritual desire to serve.
The core issue is that the desire to give love is being made contingent on first receiving a child that meets very specific physical criteria,
You're demanding to receive before you're willing to give.
which betrays the whole spiritual opportunity. And the sources note that when you add financial arrangements to that, as with some surrogacy, the situation becomes even more unsavory.
Because it moves even further away from selfless giving and closer to a transaction.
Again, the goal here isn't to judge these deeply personal choices. It's about applying the framework. It offers a different lens for decision-making, one that forces a conscious look at your true motivation when you're facing these powerful emotional urges.
So it's not about which path is better. It's about the internal driver. Is it the ego wanting to be fulfilled or the spirit wanting to serve?
The gift is realizing the child isn't here to complete your life. The child is the catalyst for your spiritual evolution.
So what does this all mean then? It means shifting the focus from how do I get the child I want to?
Am I ready for the spiritual work this child is going to demand of me?
It lets an objective person see these incredibly heart-rending issues, from an unwanted pregnancy to infertility, in a new light, a light that's anchored in selfless growth.
Exactly.
And that brings us to a really fascinating final thought from the source material. We've spent this whole time talking about the results of procreation.
The child as a curriculum for the parent.
Yes. But the sources just briefly mention that a whole separate discussion is needed on the spiritual principles of the act that gives rise to procreation, the natural urge itself.
They note that the urge itself holds immense opportunity for spiritual growth when it's applied properly.
And grave consequences when it's misused. So for you, the listener, here's something to think about. If ignorance of these feedback mechanisms is already so evident in our current social crises, as these sources argue, what deeper consequences might we be experiencing, maybe without even realizing it, because of a similar misunderstanding of the procreative act itself?
That is definitely something to mull over.
And a topic for another deep dive.